we have borne with them. I know, however, that we cannot live with these restrictions forever, and experiences of other countries that have attempted to move on in the wake of the pandemic. A consensus has emerged from these consultations that we should embark on a strategic, controlled, progressive, safe easing of restrictions to get our lives and economy back to normal. As I stated in my May Day address a month ago, I'm now in a position to outline the roadmap for easing safely the restrictions. Ours is going to be a phased approach involving a selected list of public gatherings based on their risk profile, socioeconomic impact, and most importantly, our capacity to enforce and to respond in the event of a flare-up in our number of infections. So, fellow Ghanaians, with effect from Friday, 5th June, we will begin stage 1 of the process of easing restrictions. An abridged format for religious services can commence. 25% attendance, with a maximum number of 100 congregants, can worship at a time in church or at the mosque, with a mandatory 1-meter rule of social distancing between congregants. In addition to the mandatory wearing of masks for all persons at all times in churches and mosques, a register of names and contact details of all worshippers and hand-washing facilities and sanitizers must be provided, with a maximum duration of 1 hour for each service. Religious institutions that are desirous of opening their premises to their members, such as churches, mosques, and others, must disinfect, fumigate, and put in place the requisite logistics needed to guarantee safe opening and operationing. They must work with the designated regulatory bodies and undertake test runs of the protocols I have outlined. I would appeal to them, in the case of Christians, on the first Sunday of reopening, i.e. 7th June, in the case of the Adventists, Saturday, 6th June, and in the case of Muslims, on the first Friday, i.e. Salat al-Jum'ah, on 5th June, to dedicate their worship to prayers for the nation in these challenging times. The Minister for Religious Affairs will tomorrow, Monday, 1st June, outline in detail the specific guidelines for the safe reopening of our churches and mosques. From Monday, 15th June, the decision has been taken after engagement with the teacher unions, whose cooperation I salute, to reopen schools and universities to allow for final year, junior high, senior high, and university students to resume classes ahead of the conduct of their respective exit examinations. Indeed, final year university students are to report to their universities on 15th June. Final year senior high school SHS3 students, together with SHS2 Go Track students, on 22nd June. And final year junior high school JHS3 students on 29th June will comprise a maximum of 30 students. SHS classes a maximum of 25 students, and university lectures will take place with half the class sizes. All final year students of education and training institutions, which are being managed by the Ministry of Education and the heads of public and private educational institutions, will fumigate and disinfect their institutions. Each student, teacher, and non-teaching staff will be provided with reusable face masks by the Ministry of Education. With the avoidance of doubt, all other educational facilities, private and public, for non-final year students will remain closed. The Minister for Education in the coming days will outline in detail the specific guidelines for the safe reopening of our schools and universities. Private burials, now with a maximum of 100 persons, can continue to be performed. Restaurants providing seated services can operate under appropriate social distancing arrangements and hygiene protocols. Individual, non-contact sports can go ahead. Conferences, workshops, weddings, and political activities, except rallies, can now take place, but with limited numbers, not exceeding 100 persons present, with the appropriate social distancing and hygiene protocols. Marketplaces, workplaces, public transport, and constitutional and statutory bodies such as the Electoral Commission, the National Commission for Civic Education, and the National Identification Authority, whose activities were exempted from the outset from these restrictions, must conduct their activities in accordance with social distancing and the necessary hygiene and safety protocols. Whilst we step up public education of the protocols on public gatherings, let me also state that regulatory agencies will undertake random checks to ensure conformity with these rules, and the security services will be tasked to enforce them. Should any institution fail to adhere to these directives, its activities will be immediately prohibited and relevant sanctions applied. I have by executive instrument provided for these new directions and extended the suspension of the remaining public gatherings as set out in EI 64 15th March until 31st July. In here, I refer to the suspension of sporting events, nightclubs, cinemas, drinking spots, bars, beaches, festivals, funerals, political rallies, and large religious gatherings such as crusades, pilgrimages, and conventions. Our border, by air, land, and sea, remains closed until further notice for human traffic. However, given that there are Ghana residents stranded abroad, special dispensation is going to be given for their evacuation back to Ghana, where they will be subjected to the mandatory quarantine and safety protocols. Fellow Ghanaians, it is said that with greater freedom comes greater responsibility. The introduction of this phased opening up of our country means that each and every one of us must continue to remain vigilant and respect the enhanced hygiene and social distance protocol and ruin the successes we have chalked over this period. Yes, there exists a possibility of a potential surge in infections. As a precautionary measure, we've strengthened further our existing national, regional, and district response teams with the support of the security forces to step up to deal with any eventuality. Over recent weeks, we have learned from the cases at the fish processing plant in Tema and in the Obuasi municipality how to deal with such sudden spikes. We will continue to learn, review, and adjust where and when we need to do so. We will only proceed with this staggered opening up of our country when it is safe to do so. Fellow Ghanaians, now more than ever, we must adhere to enhanced personal hygiene and social distancing protocols. Wash our hands with soap under running water, refrain from shaking hands, and wear our masks whenever we leave our homes. In the Ghanaian context, it has been established that the cases of comorbidity, i.e. underlying health conditions, that are associated with almost all the COVID-related deaths are mainly diabetes and hypertension. The risk factors for these diseases are being overweight, eating refined foods, too much salt and sugar in meals, inadequate physical exercise, excessive alcohol intake, and smoking. It is thus critical that we improve our fitness levels and adopt healthy eating practices that incorporate our local foodstuffs, which boost our immune systems. Persons with these diseases must take extra precautions and take their treatment seriously. I'm calling upon the Ministry of Information, the National Commission for Civic Education, and the media to intensify public education of these protocols and directions. I entreat all religious, traditional, community and opinion leaders to continue to